Hi, everyone. I'm Catherine Korostoff from Research Rockstar. Thanks for joining us here today. Today, we're going to be doing the third in our four-part series on preparing market research and insights teams for 2022. Obviously, we've all had a lot of interesting experiences in 2021, and myself and my colleagues want to make sure we reflect on what we've learned and how that can help us all with continuous improvement in 2022. Now, it's a big topic, talking about how to take our learnings from one year and apply it to the next year. So we broke it into 4 topics. Our first episode was about what we learned about research methodology choices. Our second was about improving survey data quality. And today we're going to be talking about work from home. And really, it's about 2 aspects of that. First of all, as researchers, many of us ended up doing research about work from home over this past year. Research with employees. In fact, I know a lot of researchers who had never really done much employee research before, but got thrust into it because so many organizations were doing research of their employee bases in addition to their regular customer research. So doing research with their employees and other stakeholder groups to understand what's likely to occur with work from home in the future. And I want to talk about what we've learned about how to do that, because it did pose some challenges, which we'll talk about in just a second. And then the second thing I want to talk about is what we've learned about work from home as it applies to us as market researchers. Whether you work for a large market research agency, or if you're in the at a smaller agency, or if you're a market research department of one, or if you work on a larger internal in-house market research and insights team. Obviously, work from home has been an issue, a topic that's been relevant to many of us. So how has it impacted our work as market researchers? So that'll be our focus for today. And I'd like to welcome my guests for today, Michelle Legros and Cindy Casper. Michelle, can I ask you to do a brief introduction?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle. I am delighted to be a Research Rockstar instructor, and I teach a couple courses here, and hopefully maybe you've seen me in one of those. I also have a background in both client side and supplier side market research. I've been doing this for a long time across a lot of industries, have a specialty in healthcare research as well, and I'm delighted to be here.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. And Cindy, may I ask you for a quick introduction?
Sure. So I've been doing this for a while as well, primarily client side. And I recently switched to supplier side and have gone out on my own. Most recently, I was with Arizona State University, and prior to that, I was primarily working with retailers or for retailers and trying to combine marketing research with other sources of insights, other types of data. And I've recently started teaching for Research Rockstar as well.
Excellent. Thank you, folks, for those nice introductions. And one of the things that I really appreciate about what both Michelle and Cindy bring to this topic is that they both have experience working on insights teams and on the supply side. So for our community of research and insights professionals, we absolutely have people who are internal at brands and work at research agencies. So I love that they both have a lot of experience to share. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Catherine Korostoff. I'm the lead instructor here at Research Rockstar. I teach several courses, both qual and quant topics. And I've worked in a wide variety of vertical industries, a lot in tech and consumer electronics, but also in other consumer products, product areas as well. So as we go into this conversation, what I want to start with is the topic of how we research work from home. A lot of surveys have been done about what's going to happen with work from home. And it's been a big topic. I know with many of our students here at Research Rockstar as well, is what's the best way to do research on this when so many things are uncertain? You know, there are unknown variants. There's different types of population responses and trends about vaccinations. There's just so many uncertain variables. So how do you do research to predict what's going to happen with work from home? How do you do a survey or qualitative research to understand how likely people are going to be to return to the office if they're offered that option? It's a really, really hard thing. And so to kind of investigate this issue myself, what I did was I looked at a number of different surveys that have been publicized just in this year alone. And many of them are pretty large surveys, typically sample sizes of, I've got sample sizes of 1,500, over 30,000. So good sample size survey-based research. And what's really interesting is that you do see some inconsistencies in the data. In some of these surveys, you have a larger percentage of people who are eager to go back to the office. In other surveys, you get more people who are looking for hybrid. I will say that overall, the trend does seem to be most people, the majority usually is looking for a hybrid. I've yet to see a survey where the majority of people surveyed said, we want to go back to the office full time. And so there's definitely a trend towards the hybrid, but it still begs the question of, how accurate is this data? If we, there are a lot of different scales we can use to ask people about, well, if you were offered the option of working from home permanently, how likely are you to take that? Well, there are a lot of different ways we can do, we can do an expectation scale, we could do a likelihood scale. There's many different scales we can use, but there's been a lot of discussion about how do you measure a potential future behavior when there are so many uncertainties. So first I wanted to open it up to Michelle and Cindy to see is this a topic that you have had to tackle yet to try to understand how to measure or explore how people are going to behave in the future?
When you said hybrid, Catherine, it made me think of it in a new way, because having just come from higher education, there used to always be the on-campus modality, it's called, and then there became the online modality, which is remote. And then we came up with words like synchronous and asynchronous, which you probably know because you're creating instruction as well. And about 7 years ago, when I got to ASU, my initial sort of tracking data of these audiences was saying that these categories were going to merge, and people on both sides doing the online instruction and doing the in-person thought I was crazy. And lo and behold, even though they are maintained as separate units, they are each offering a hybrid solution that makes them look like each other now. But that's really weird for the customer, for the student to be like, do I want to roll in online hybrid or campus hybrid? And in both cases, I'm doing a combination of in-person and remote work. And so I think it's something that employers are going to have to start to wrestle with too, because there are jobs that, and I think it primarily exists on the supplier side. If your clients are all over the country or all over the world, there's been less of a requirement to have everybody centrally located, because you need to get out and about anyway. As long as you live near an airport, you're good. And then there tended to be client side that were centrally located. And now I think there's starting to be more flexibility on both parts, but maybe client side can start to learn from supplier side best practices of how do you maintain that humanness when you're not all physically co-located.
Yeah, and I love your lesson there, and I love your point about the parallel with the university scenario. That's really interesting. And fantastic idea about having people learn from each other, whether they're coming from a role or an organization type that was primarily doing, that was already largely doing a lot of remote work. What about designing research? Does anybody, have either of you had this situation yet where you've had to either consult on projects or be involved with projects where you were looking to actually measure from an employee group or a population group likelihood to continue working from home? Have you run into any experiences there?
Catherine, yes, and a little bit of a twist on that, but I have a client that I do some ongoing research for, and it's a B2B type of project. So I'm speaking with clients of my client, and one of the things that we looked at, it's a client loyalty type of initiative where we speak with, I speak qualitatively. I do interviews with a number of their clients every month. And one of the things that we've been doing probably for the past 18 months is really talking a lot about some of the challenges and some of the new challenges that our clients are facing in this environment today. And, I'll say, just to even back it up a step, one of the challenges I have as a researcher in reaching some of these folks is, where do I call them? And excuse me, in a lot of cases, I have both an office number and a cell number, and have found that it's awfully hard to reach people on that work number that they may have had, even if they had more of an office-based job before. So it's even in, how do we reach them? What kind of challenges they're facing in how they have adjusted to remote, and now how they're adjusting back to what's the new, overused phrase, but what's the new normal? It's not going back to what it was, but how do we do things in this, Cindy, as you talked about, part-time remote, part-time maybe in the office or more in-person world. So those are some of the challenges that I'm hearing on the B2B side that people are wrestling with.
It's really interesting because you really bring up two very different issues. One is the issue of, as the researcher, if I'm doing research interviews, in the past, we would assume typically that we were calling business numbers, but these days, and it's funny because email signature lines for years, people now have had both their business and their mobile number, but at least I always was like, I'm only going to use the mobile number if they tell me it's okay to use it, even though it's in their signature. I always felt a little uncomfortable calling their mobile number, but it feels like, in your experience here, that it sort of accelerated the acceptability of contacting people by their cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I really think, well, and when I looked at just from an efficiency perspective as a researcher and how much time it took me to try to track people down, especially every month I have specific clients that I'm trying to complete an interview with. And so I really want to reach that person, and how I do that and where I find them and how long it takes me to find them has been very interesting to me. And because I had the same hesitation with calling someone's cell phone, and, was I going to catch them, out of the office and, at lunch, or, in a, at home, or helping their kids or something like that. And that certainly has happened. I will say though, most people, I've only had a couple of times where someone has been, how'd you get this number? Now I'm getting it, they've already provided it to my client for work purposes, but still, I've caught people off guard a little bit. But interestingly, I'm finding that people, when they pick up their cell phone, they're almost more willing to talk to me. They have a little more time to chat. And I'm catching people in the car, and I'm catching them, during work hours in different ways. But I found it very interesting from just an efficiency perspective on my end of how much time it takes me to track them down. And if I've got them, and then they don't have other, they're maybe not in the office, they maybe have time to talk to me. So
I love that. I love that. So that's a really interesting takeaway. And then the other thing that you really brought up that I thought was interesting is that a lot of the surveys I've looked at have been more like surveys of employees about what they expect to do if they're offered hybrid. Are you going to choose the hybrid approach? Are you going to choose to come back to the office? And or surveys of managers about what they want for their employee groups. But you brought up this really interesting B2B case where it could also be research with the clients. If I'm a B2B company, I might want to do research with my B2B clients to understand, what are you guys doing with work from home, and how might that impact how I serve your company? So that's a really interesting angle I hadn't thought about before.
Exactly. There have been a lot of very interesting findings and some really practical things. And it's been interesting to see how it's evolved. At the very beginning of things, everyone was talking to me about technology issues and how to figure out how to do Zoom and Teams and all these programs. And I think we've moved past some of those challenges, but certainly it's been interesting how it's evolved. And I'm hearing a lot more. Sometimes people struggle a little bit with the challenge, and they want to tell me a story, a success story of what has been working well and how they've made that adjustment to make it work for both themselves and their vendor.
So then thinking, I do want to go back just to wrap up on this angle about how to make sure that we're researching the topic correctly. One other thing I wanted to share was that as you look at surveys on this topic, one of the popular angles is the topic, and I'm just going to go back here for a second, in terms of work from home as a research topic, has been about whether or not work from home has helped or hindered collaboration and productivity. And there actually has been conflicting data about this. There have been a couple of studies that have been talked about that are very much on that it's actually hurt productivity and collaboration, but there have been other studies. So for example, one of the studies that was done by, you can see them, I'm cheating here and I'm looking at my notes. One of the studies that I've seen references to and that I've read about was by the actually joint between Stanford and the University of Chicago. And they actually suggest that there has actually been a productivity improvement. And so I think one of the challenges with this data, though, is that as we're looking at some data showing that collaboration and productivity has increased and other data says that it's decreased, is that there's been methodology differences too. So some of the studies that say that productivity has declined are based on not a survey data, but based on employee online activity data. And it's been those studies that have been primarily based on IT professionals, because they're people for whom you have a lot of online productivity data. You have everything they do is logged basically. And so it's easy to do. So I think it's really interesting when we see some of this data, but as researchers, of course, we know we always have to have a real critical eye on, okay, you're saying that productivity is down, but based on what population? Well, IT workers are a very, very particular population and certainly don't represent, a wider workforce population. So that's one thing. And then the other thing that's interesting to me is how many of these surveys have actually been based on, when it is based on survey data as opposed to behavioral data. It's been really interesting to me to see how many of these surveys are don't really ask people to do comparisons. It's basically saying, how do you think your productivity has increased or decreased, or how do you think collaboration has increased or decreased? And I'm very curious to me, because as a researcher, I might have wanted to ask them some different questions about, what were the behaviors 2 years ago? Okay, what are the behaviors now? Instead of saying, tell me whether you think it's increased or decreased. I might have wanted to go for more specific behavioral measurements, even if I was asking them basically to recall. So I think it's just, when we're looking at some of these studies, we have to be a little bit critical, and really get into how did they actually word those questions? Because some of it feels like it might be very much not actually doing a comparison, but just looking at what my personal opinion is at this moment in time. And unfortunately, there weren't a lot of studies being done about work from home before. There were some, but there weren't a lot. So it's not like we can say, okay, we did a work from home study about productivity and collaboration 5 years ago, and we did another one last year, and this was the difference. That generally isn't something that's available to us. So I think with that, what I'd like to do is transition our last little bit of time here today to talk about how all of this affects our work as market researchers. Here at Research Rockstar, we have students who do work on insights teams. We have other folks who work at market research agencies, large and small. And obviously, a lot of people have been working from home. And we have a lot of teams that are still working from home completely. But I know a lot of our students have told me that they are now being offered that sometime in the foreseeable future, they're going to be given a choice. Their department or their company is going to give them a choice of, do you want to come back in the office? And if so, do you want to do it full-time or part-time? What are you folks seeing in terms of the actual work of market researchers with respect to work from home?
Well, I'm seeing that as well, with clients and friends and colleagues in the industry, of folks having the opportunity, and most people that I know, flexibility is a good thing. It's almost seen as an employee benefit. Mm-hmm. And in some cases it's being kind of marketed that way, right? So the hybrid approach is something that I think, especially, kind of depending on your life stage. I mean, some of the research I would like to do myself personally is look at how these, I'll say, kind of employee benefits, how the work from home, the flexibility kind of aligns perhaps even with life stage and other things outside of the office. One of the things that is just fascinating to me as a researcher in how I run my own business, and I'll just weave in a little bit of a promo here for one of the best classes at Research Rockstar is client management, and take it with me, because we do a lot of cool stuff, and there's a lot of great things to learn there. But I'm a huge relationship person, and I've always been a huge in the office, in person kind of person. I really thrive on creating and growing these relationships. And so I personally, as a researcher and a business owner, have been, especially with new clients that I've had in the last 18 months, how do I really get to know these clients? How do I get to know, if you've taken my class, how do I get to know about their personas and how they work and styles, and how do they get to know me, and how do we establish that trust and relationship via Zoom? And I am really reflecting now, as we're looking at the end of 2021, how well did I do with that this year, especially with some of the newer clients? And what does that mean for how I might do things differently going forward, especially in the whole relationship building arena? And I'm not sure, I don't know that I have all the answers, but I know that it's something that I think we all need to be thinking about, regardless if we're more of an extrovert and we really thrive on that, or we prefer being at home. I'm married to someone who prefers to be working at home, and he doesn't really miss the day-to-day activity and all the hubbub of being in the office, or meeting up with clients for, coffee or meetings or whatever. I miss that more, and I miss those. I love those little opportunities to create personal connections with folks, that happen in the little unscripted ways. And how do you do that in the world of Zoom? I've been thinking
Michelle,
a lot about
I think
that.
that's the $1 million question. And I'm on the opposite end of that, where my husband's the extrovert. He was so excited to be able to go back. And I am loving working from home. And since I'm my own boss now, I can predict that at least as long as I'm running my little organization, I'm going to be working from home, because why would I leave my house when there's nobody else? And so all of my relationships are long distance. And so how do I, especially as a more introverted person, take advantage of the technology and find ways to make that more human connection? And I can say, though, that the flip side of of this is, even though there is hardware and distance and technology between us, we're also in many cases inside people's personal spaces. And so, I get to see the cool artwork you have hanging on your wall and ask you a question about it. And I see your family going by, and, I have this one client, his daughter's always crawling on the floor thinking she's underneath the camera. And, you meet their pets, especially cats soon to get involved in the video. And so in some ways there's more humanness there and more opportunity to have those, water cooler moments, even if you're not physically in the workspace together.
That's really, really interesting. It's funny because I think in the beginning we talked a lot when the pandemic first started and we were all starting to work from home. There was a lot of talk about one of the benefits was the acceleration of needed technologies, that a lot of market research teams needed to be doing a better job of project management and knowledge sharing anyway, and many had been kind of putting off maybe those investments and optimizations, but now they had no choice. So it kind of accelerated certain types of business process improvements that really needed to happen anyway. So in the beginning, I was hearing a lot of that, but I'm with you folks. Now I hear that, a lot of teams have now improved their processes and their technology. Their team members have become more comfortable. People who may not have been so comfortable maybe with screen sharing it, 2 years ago now, screen share and chat and webcam at the same time. But it's the non-technical stuff that is still a little bit elusive. One thing that I heard from Maya Middlemas, who's an expert in the whole work from home space, and I did actually a video interview with her about, was it 4 or 5 months ago, that's available on our YouTube channel. And she's not specific to market research, but she's just a work from home expert and has been for years, from way before this. And one of the things that she talked about is the need to over communicate, that, things that you might have been able to communicate quickly or briefly in an in-person situation. She really coaches people on getting more comfortable with really over communicating. And that doesn't mean writing a 10-page email, because nobody's going to read that, right? But just the idea that you have to selectively repeat the information that you need to communicate to a colleague or a stakeholder, a team member, that you often do really need to make sure you repeat yourself over, the course of multiple meetings or conversations or emails, because that's going to be a way for you to make sure that you are communicating effectively. And because people are working from home and they do have distractions, they do have Zoom fatigue, it really becomes so important to try that very simple strategy of just making sure you are, in fact, over communicating.
I really think this is kind of a transition. Like, I know we're all, since we all said we've been doing this for over 25 years, we probably all remember working when there wasn't email. Right?
I remember when email came out. Yes.
And I remember when email first came out, my boss would print all his emails so that he could physically read them like a memo. And so, we all figured out how to get email to work, even though it was a foreign and impersonal mode of communication, as opposed to in-person or memos or phone. And then we got to where we kind of had to teach ourselves, when is it time to pick up the phone versus send an email, and email best practices, and, don't reply all. And so now I think we're just like entering that next phase of technology evolution. And we're going to have similar things of, when do you need to personally connect with someone outside of a scheduled Zoom with a whole bunch of people? And I'm actually working, I've got a gig that Research Rockstar helped me obtain with a company that's very progressive technologically and does a lot of work for tech companies. And not only are the studies that we're doing about advancing the working technology and communication technology, but they're using it themselves. And so I'm on a big learning curve of learning how to, like, oh, someone's calling me on Teams randomly. I have to answer that. And so I think the times are going to, the technology is going to catch up with the times. And I think that ongoing human need to belong and connect and build relationships is going to be there to make sure that it remains human.
So I feel like one of the takeaways then is, as we think about what we've learned, even in our own work as researchers in 2021 that can impact what we do in 2022 is really making sure that we're prepared to leverage what can be multiple modes of communication so that we're comfortable really leveraging, in many cases, what could be multiple modes, and some of which might be a little uncomfortable for us. Like, I actually have clients who text me now, which was kind of a weird thing. I got to tell you at first, it was a little bit uncomfortable getting text messages. But, you know, it is something that is part of my life now, that I do have certain people who text me for business things. So we've got Teams, we've got Zoom, we've got all these different things. So I think that's a really interesting thing to reflect on for next year, is like, okay, how do we give guidance to our teams about what to use, and how do we, you know, also maybe set some boundaries about, you know, what we should use under what circumstances, so that people don't just rely on what's comfortable for them, but are choosing the right mode of communication going forward. And then I think it's interesting as we also reflect on what we've learned in 2021 and going forward into 2022, is it does sound like there are a lot of folks who are either going to be continuing to work from home or in a hybrid situation next year. And so I think there's still some opportunity to really reflect on what did we learn from our use of technology? What did we learn from our experiences with either successful or unsuccessful ad hoc communications that we can try to tackle in 2022? And, you know, it sounds really corny, but maybe it's really just about some of the, you know, making sure that we are putting in some processes in place to make sure that there are opportunities for fun, even if it's online, you know. So not to make fun sound unspontaneous, but you know, what can we do to like create opportunities for people to have some of those happy accidental conversations that we may, some of us may be feeling we're not getting enough of. Any other last words of wisdom? Oh, I'm sorry, Michelle, did you have one more?
Oh yeah, well, I just wanted to kind of tag along on the last statement. One of the notes I wrote to myself as I'm looking into next year is question to myself, you know, is it all work and no fun? And certainly the places that when I reflect back a couple of years ago and I think about what were some of my, you know, my fun best days at work. And I do qualitative. I love traveling on focus group and interview trips, and you know, those have gone away. They may start to come back, but I love some of the opportunities to meet and know people outside of a meeting and that type of thing. So it's how and where do you create those opportunities for fun? One of the things I teach in my class is you can learn an awful lot about someone and their business and their product and what they worry about in the backseat of an Uber, right? You know, I mean, you know, or sitting at a gate waiting for a plane, or, you know, those types of opportunities that are unplanned. How do you create some of that unplanned learning about the business and people and relationships? And so I think that's going to be a skill that, you know, we all will need to continue to refine as things don't go back. Cindy, I love your comments around, hey, you know, we are getting a view into people's personal spaces with home offices and some of the funny distractions that we've all encountered with kids and pets and, you know, the UPS delivery person and all that kind of stuff that that allows us to bring some humor into work and kind of continuing that as well. But I think some of the opportunities and challenges that we've had with work from home are here to stay. and how do we make the best of it? And I would say, I think there's a need to interject fun back into work. And I would love to continue to work on that, Catherine, next year.
Thank you. Me too. I think it's a really interesting topic. I want to thank you both for being here today. This was really great to have your participation. Again, this was our third in our 4-part series. And I want to thank Cindy and Michelle both for being here. And our next episode is going to be with Michelle again, along with Jeffrey Henning and Kate Sepp. And we're going to be talking now in our 4th part about overall, what have we learned about our own skills and knowledge needs that as market research and insights professionals that can inform what we do next year. I hope you found this conversation helpful. For those of you who are new to the video podcast series, it is available on YouTube and is also available in an audio only format on Apple Podcasts and also on Amazon as an Audible audio only format. If you like it, please do share and subscribe so that we can get the word out. And thanks again to Michelle and Cindy for all of your candid experience sharing. That was really helpful. Thanks, everyone.
Catherine.